The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door of their studio apartment like a snake sliding into a henhouse. Marianne Cole stood frozen in the doorway, her 7-year-old daughter Sophie's backpack still weighing down her shoulder, staring at the official county seal that seemed to pulse with malice in the afternoon light. 60 days. That's all she had left before the bank took everything. The cramped 400-square-foot studio that smelled permanently of cooking grease from the restaurant below, the space that had somehow held their entire lives for the past 3 years after Robert left. After Robert stopped being a husband and became a ghost who occasionally sent apologetic texts from somewhere in Colorado with a new girlfriend and a new life that had no room for the family he'd built and abandoned. Sophie dropped her crayons on the floor, the sound of them scattering across worn linoleum, pulling Marianne back to the present. "Mama, can we have mac and cheese for dinner?" Her daughter's voice carried that particular pitch of carefully maintained cheerfulness that broke Marianne's heart daily. Sophie had learned early, too early, to read her mother's stress levels, to adjust her needs accordingly, to ask for the cheap things, the easy things, the things that wouldn't add one more weight to shoulders already buckling. "Of course, baby." Marianne forced brightness into her voice that felt like swallowing glass. "Go wash your hands." At 32, Marianne had thought she'd have more figured out by now. She believed the promises: work hard, stay honest, do everything right, and life would reward you with stability, maybe even comfort. Instead, she was a medical receptionist making $15.50 an hour in Hartford, Connecticut, drowning in debt from Robert's gambling addiction she hadn't discovered until after he'd emptied their savings, maxed out credit cards in her name, and disappeared with $47,000 of money they didn't have. The studio apartment had been a desperate downgrade from their former 2-bedroom rental, but even this was $1,400 monthly, and she was 3 months behind. The eviction wasn't a surprise. She'd known it was coming the way you know winter is coming when autumn leaves start falling. Inevitable, unstoppable, cruel in its indifference to your unpreparedness. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep in their shared pull-out sofa bed, Marianne sat on the floor with her laptop, scrolling through rental listings with tears blurring the screen. Everything required first month, last month security deposit, $4,000 minimum just to get keys. She had $183 in her checking account and a paycheck coming Friday that would be $890 after taxes, already allocated to debt payments that would leave her with maybe $200 for groceries and gas. The math was simple and devastating. There was no solution that added up to housed and fed and safe. She called her older sister Elena in Portland around midnight, the tears finally coming in choking sobs she'd been holding back since seeing that foreclosure notice. "Mari, God, I wish I could help." Elena's voice carried genuine anguish. "But with Mom's nursing home costs and Javier's hours getting cut, we're barely making our mortgage. I'm so sorry." I know. Marianne wiped her face with shaking hands. "I just needed to hear your voice." After hanging up, she stared at the ceiling, watching the play of headlights from the street below create moving shadows that looked like predators circling. Sophie stirred beside her, muttering something in her sleep about butterflies, and Marianne felt something crack inside her chest. She would not let her daughter become homeless. She would not let Sophie learn that mother's promises meant nothing when the world decided to crush you. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, Marianne found herself scrolling through increasingly desperate housing options. Craigslist ads for rooms and houses with mature male roommates only. Absolutely not. Facebook Marketplace listings for RVs that looked like they'd barely survived their last journey. Government housing with wait lists 18 months long. Then she saw it, posted on an obscure New England real estate liquidation site she'd never heard of, dated just 4 days earlier. Historic estate, immediate sale, Ashford, Connecticut Blackwood Manor. Built 1847. 3 stories, 12 rooms, 1.5 acres. Severe ivy overgrowth, structural concerns, sold ASGS. Town auction for unpaid property taxes. Minimum bid, $1. Serious inquiries only. Viewing by appointment. Below was a single photograph that looked like something from a Gothic horror film. A massive Victorian mansion, its once grand architecture completely obscured by ivy so thick and aggressive it seemed to be consuming the building alive. The vines covered every surface, walls, windows, turrets, creating a living green shroud that made the house look more like an ancient ruins being reclaimed by nature than a standing structure. The ivy was so dense that Marianne could barely make out the original building beneath. In some places, the vines were easily 3 feet thick, their gnarled trunks as thick as tree branches, their leaves creating a canopy that blocked out the windows entirely. The whole thing looked like the house from a fairy tale, the one where the princess sleeps for 100 years while thorns grow over the castle. Or like something you'd see in a nightmare about nature finally defeating human civilization. Marianne stared at the photograph for a full minute, her exhausted brain trying to process what she was seeing. A mansion for $1 in Ashford, which was only 45 minutes from Hartford. It was insane, completely, utterly insane. The listing said severe ivy overgrowth, like that was a minor aesthetic issue rather than what looked like a biblical plague of aggressive vegetation. Structural concerns was probably code for about to collapse any minute, and $1 minimum bid meant nobody else wanted it even for $1, which should have been all the warning she needed. But it was a building with walls and a roof. Theoretically, underneath all that ivy, it existed somewhere in Connecticut, close enough that she wouldn't have to uproot Sophie from her school. And the minimum bid was $1. She had $183. Marianne's finger hovered over the contact information. The listing agent was someone named Harold Pemberton, and hours were listed as by appointment. Call anytime. Seriously, I mean anytime. It was 3:17 in the morning. This was crazy. She should sleep on it. Think rationally. Not make desperate decisions in the middle of the night when exhaustion and fear made everything seem both hopeless and possible. She dialed a number. Harold Pemberton answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly but alert, suggesting she wasn't the first person to call at ungodly hours. Pemberton, hi, I'm calling about the Blackwood Manor listing, the one in Ashford. Marianne's voice came out steadier than she felt. Is it still available? There was a pause, then a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. You're serious? Most people think it's a joke listing. I'm serious. Very serious. Can I see it? Another pause, longer this time. Lady, I'm legally obligated to tell you that building is dangerous. The ivy has been growing unchecked for probably 20 years. It's got into the walls, the foundation, everywhere. The town wants it gone because it's a safety hazard and an eyesore. They're not even sure the structure is sound enough to demolish safely. Can I see it? Marianne repeated. Harold sighed. Yeah, you can see it. When? Tomorrow. Today, I mean. She glanced at the clock. Later this morning? Meet me there at 10. I'll text you the address. Fair warning. Bring heavy gloves if you want to get close. That ivy has thorns. After hanging up, Marianne stared at her phone, her heart racing. She just made an appointment to view a mansion that looked like it was being eaten alive by plants. A mansion nobody wanted. A mansion she could potentially own for $1. She was either about to save her daughter's future or make the worst decision of her life. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Marianne called in sick to work, her third sick day this month, which would definitely get her written up, and told Sophie they were going on an adventure. Where are we going? Sophie's eyes lit up in a way that made Marianne's heart ache. Her daughter had so few adventures that even a mysterious car ride qualified as excitement. To see something special, something that might become our new home. A new apartment? Sophie's face fell slightly. They'd looked at apartments before, depressing walkthroughs of places that were somehow worse than what they had and cost more. Not an apartment, a house. A really old, really interesting house. The drive to Ashford took them out of Hartford's urban sprawl and into Connecticut's countryside, where autumn had painted the landscape in shades of rust and gold that seemed almost aggressive in their beauty. The GPS led them down increasingly rural roads, past farms and forests, until finally directing them onto a long dirt driveway that wound through overgrown property. And then they saw it. The photograph hadn't done it justice, or rather, it had somehow made it seem less overwhelming than the reality. Blackwood Manor rose before them like something from a fever dream. It was massive, easily 8,000 square feet, if Marianne had to guess, 3 full stories of Victorian architecture that had probably been magnificent once. She could make out turrets, a wraparound porch, bay windows, elaborate woodwork. All of it entombed in ivy so thick and aggressive that it looked like the house was being slowly suffocated by vegetable fingers. The ivy covered everything. Walls were invisible beneath layers of vine thick as a man's torso. Windows were completely blocked by leaves so dense they might as well have been bricked over. The front steps were barely visible beneath a carpet of growth that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. But what struck Marianne most, what made her breath catch and her skin prickle, was the face. On the second-floor corner, where the ivy had grown particularly thick, the vines had formed what looked disturbingly like a human face. 2 hollow spaces where windows had been consumed suggested eyes. The way the ivy draped beneath them created the impression of a nose. And a section where vines had grown in a perfect arc created what looked like a screaming mouth. It was coincidence, obviously, just a random pattern of plant growth that happened to resemble human features. But it was unsettling in a way that made Marianne's rational mind fight against her instinctive desire to get back in the car and drive away. "Mama." Sophie's voice was small. "The vines look like a face." "I know, baby. It's just how they grew. It's not real." A newer pickup truck was already parked near what must have been the front entrance, and a man emerged as they pulled up. Harold Pemberton was probably in his 60s, wearing work clothes and an expression that suggested he'd seen too many foolish people do foolish things to be surprised by anything anymore. "Miss Cole." He approached with a handshake that was firm but not crushing. "Harold Pemberton. Call me Marianne. This is my daughter, Sophie." Harold smiled at Sophie, a genuine expression that softened his weathered face. "Quite a house, isn't it?" "It's scary," Sophie whispered, pressing against Marianne's leg. "Scary, strange, and stubborn," Harold agreed. "That ivy's English ivy, invasive as hell. Previous owner let it go wild back in the 90s, and it's been taking over ever since. House has been abandoned for about 18 years. Marianne couldn't stop staring at the structure. Despite the ivy, despite the clear signs of abandonment, there was something about the building that drew her. Maybe it was the sheer presence of it. The solid Victorian construction that had withstood 177 years of New England weather. Or maybe it was desperation making even a monster look like salvation. "Can we go inside?" Harold pulled out an impressive ring of keys. "We could try." Front doors, probably the safest entry point, though safe is relative here. "Stay close, watch where you step, and if I say we're leaving immediately." "Understood." They approached the entrance, Harold hacking through the ivy with a machete he'd pulled from his truck. The vines resisted, tough and fibrous, some of them thick enough that cutting through felt like sawing wood. Thorns caught on their clothes, leaving small scratches that burned. The front door was solid wood, swollen from years of moisture. It took Harold's full weight plus a crowbar to get it open. The sound it made was like a groan, with protesting movement after nearly 2 decades of stillness. The smell hit them first. Not decay exactly, but something organic and overwhelming. The scent of plant life that had invaded every corner of moisture-trapped and growing things that shouldn't be growing indoors. Mushrooms, Marianne realized. The smell was mushrooms and rot, and something green and alive. Inside was like stepping into a fairy tale gone wrong. The entry foyer was grand, with a sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. Or it had been grand once. Now ivy had forced its way through windows, through cracks in the walls, even up through the floorboards in some places. Vines snaked across the ceiling, hung from the chandelier, carpeted the stairs in green that obscured the wood beneath. But despite the invasion, the bones were magnificent. Marianne could see past the vegetation to the craftsmanship underneath. Hand-carved banisters, plaster ceiling medallions, hardwood floors that were probably original to the 1847 construction. The windows, where visible behind the ivy, were original glass with that slight wave that indicated age and quality. "My God," Marianne whispered. It's beautiful. Harold gave her a sharp look. It's a disaster. This much ivy means root damage to the foundation. Probably mold throughout, structural issues we can't even assess until the plants are removed. And removing them would be a nightmare. You can't just cut them down. The roots have penetrated everything. You'd need professional remediation, probably tens of thousands of dollars. Sophie had moved to the staircase, reaching out to touch a vine with curious fingers. Mama, look. The leaves are shaped like hearts. Harold continued his warnings as they moved carefully through the first floor. The kitchen was impassable, completely overgrown. The parlor had a tree, an actual tree, maybe 15 feet tall, growing up through a hole in the floor where a bay window had been. The library was filled with books, so rotted and covered in ivy that they become indistinguishable from the shelves supporting them. But there were moments of heartbreaking beauty, too. A fireplace with hand-painted tiles showing scenes from Shakespeare. A window seat with carved wood panels depicting birds and flowers. A butler's pantry with glass-fronted cabinets still holding china that had somehow survived. The second floor is worse, Harold said as they stood at the base of the stairs. I don't recommend going up. But Marianne was already climbing, careful to test each step. The stairs held, solid beneath the ivy, and she emerged into a hallway where the face-like pattern she'd seen from outside was even more pronounced from within. From inside, you could see that the eyes were actually two windows completely blocked by ivy so thick that no light penetrated. The nose was a decorative arch that the vines had perfectly outlined, and the mouth, the screaming mouth, was formed by vines that had forced their way through a door frame and grown in an almost perfect arc. It was still just coincidence. But standing there, in the dim green light filtered through leaves, Marianne felt something shift. Not fear exactly, but a strange recognition, as if the house itself was a living thing that had been waiting, suffering, screaming silently for nearly 2 decades for someone to hear it. Mama! Sophie's call came from one of the rooms, and Marianne followed the sound to find her daughter standing in what must have been a bedroom. The room was less overgrown than others, just enough ivy to create a strange, grotto-like atmosphere without completely obscuring everything. And there, in the corner, was a dollhouse. A massive Victorian dollhouse, probably custom-made, that was an exact replica of Blackwood Manor itself. Sophie was transfixed, her small hands reaching toward it before pulling back, as if afraid to touch something so magical. The dollhouse was in remarkably good condition considering the state of the actual house. The ivy hadn't reached it, possibly because it sat on a table in the room's driest corner. Through tiny windows, Marianne could see miniature furniture, wallpaper, even tiny books on tiny shelves. Can I play with it? Sophie's voice was reverent. Not right now, baby. But maybe. Marianne trailed off, the weight of possibilities suddenly making it hard to breathe. Harold appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the dollhouse. That belonged to Elizabeth Blackwood, the daughter of the original builder. Family lore says she loved this house more than anything, spent hours creating that replica. When she died, must have been around 1920 or so, the family sealed this room. Some kind of memorial, I guess. What happened to the house after? Marianne asked. How did it end up like this? The Blackwood family died out in the 60s. Distant cousin inherited, tried to sell it, couldn't find buyers. Eventually just walked away and stopped paying taxes. House sat empty for years while the town tried to figure out what to do with it. Then the ivy started growing and, well, he gestured at the green apocalypse surrounding them. They made their way back downstairs, Marianne's mind racing. The house was a disaster, yes. But it was a disaster with potential, with history, with bones that had stood for 177 years and would probably stand for 177 more if someone would just remove the strangling vines. Outside, in the afternoon light that seemed impossibly bright after the green dimness, Harold pulled out paperwork. The auction is tomorrow. Town Council Chambers, 2 p.m. You'll need to register as a bidder, and there's a $50 registration fee that's non-refundable even if you don't win. $50. That left her with $133. But no first month, Last month, security deposit. No credit check she'd fail. No landlord who could raise rent whenever they felt like it. Just $1 to own a building, even if that building was currently being consumed by invasive vegetation. I'll be there, Marianne said. Harold studied her face for a long moment, and his expression softened into something that might have been sympathy or concern or both. Miss Cole, Marianne, I have to ask, you understand what you be taking on? This isn't just a fixer-upper. This is a full-scale remediation project. The ivy removal alone could cost $20,000 or more. And that's before you even know what structural damage is underneath. I understand. Do you have resources? Family who can help? Savings? Marianne thought about lying, about maintaining dignity in front of this stranger. But exhaustion and honesty won out. I have $133 to my name. I'm 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction in 60 days. I work as a medical receptionist, making $15 an hour, and my daughter and I share a pull-out couch in a studio apartment that smells like grease. She gestured at the ivy-covered mansion towering behind them. I know that house is a disaster. I know it might be impossible, but it's a disaster I could afford. And maybe, if I'm very lucky and work very hard, it's a disaster I could fix. Harold's expression had gone soft in a way that made Marianne's throat tighten. Fair enough. I admire your guts, if not your judgment. That evening, Marianne researched everything she could about Blackwood Manor, invasive ivy, and historic home restoration. The information was overwhelming and terrifying. English ivy was classified as an invasive species in Connecticut. Once established, it was nearly impossible to eradicate. The roots could penetrate mortar, damage foundations, separate siding from walls. If allowed to grow unchecked for 20 years, which it clearly had been, it could compromise the entire structure. Professional removal required, cutting all vines at the base, waiting for the ivy to die completely, which could take months, carefully removing the dead growth without damaging the building, treating the area to prevent regrowth, repairing all the damage underneath. Cost estimate, $15,000 to $30,000 depending on severity. And that was just the ivy. There would be roof damage, window damage, probably mold throughout, almost certainly foundation issues. Electrical and plumbing would need complete replacement. The house would need to be gutted, rebuilt from the inside, while preserving the historic exterior. One preservation blog estimated the total restoration cost for a property of Blackwood Manor size and condition at $200,000 to $400,000. Marianne closed her laptop with hands that wanted to shake. She had $133 and would own a house that needed $500,000 in repairs. It was insane. It was impossible. She should walk away right now, find a shelter, figure out something else. But Sophie was asleep beside her, peaceful and trusting, and Marianne thought about that dollhouse in the abandoned bedroom. About Elizabeth Blackwood, who had loved this house so much she'd spent hours recreating it in miniature. About a building that had stood for 177 years, waiting. She would go to that auction tomorrow. She would bid her single dollar. And whatever happened after that, at least she would have tried. The town council chambers were smaller than Marianne expected, probably holding 50 people at capacity. When she arrived at 1:45 p.m. with Sophie in tow, she was shocked to find it nearly full. Harold Pemberton was at a table near the front with stacks of paperwork, and he did a visible double-take when he saw her. "You came. I said I would." He processed her registration, taking her $50 with an expression that suggested he felt guilty accepting it. "You know you're not the only bidder, right? There are at least 8 people registered." Marianne's stomach dropped, but the listing said minimum bid $1. "I thought nobody wanted it. They don't want to live in it," Harold explained. "But there are 3 separate demolition companies here hoping to win the bid and then charge the town for removal. There's a developer who wants to bulldoze it and put up condos. There's even a salvage company interested in the architectural elements. Her disaster was someone else's business opportunity. How much are they likely to bid?" Marianne's voice came out small. "Demolition companies will probably go to $5,000. Developer might hit $10,000. The salvage company knows what that carved wood and original glass is worth. They might go as high as $15,000. $15,000. Marianne had $83 left after registration. Even if she offered every penny she had, she couldn't compete. Harold must have seen the devastation on her face, because his expression went sympathetic again. "I'm sorry. I should have mentioned there'd be other bidders." "It's okay." It wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. But there was no point in making a scene in front of all these people who probably already thought she was crazy for even trying. She found a seat near the back, Sophie on her lap, trying to figure out what she'd tell her daughter, trying to figure out what came next when there was nothing next. The mayor, a efficient-looking woman in her 50s named Catherine Winters, called the meeting to order at 2 p.m. exactly. She explained the auction process: sealed bids, opened publicly, highest bidder won, assuming they could prove funds. The building would convey as is, no warranties, buyer responsible for all taxes and fees from date of transfer. "Are there any questions before we begin?" Mayor Winters's eyes swept the room. A man in an expensive suit raised his hand. "What are the town's intentions regarding demolition timeline?" "We'd prefer demolition within 6 months," the mayor answered. However, the new owner would have 12 months to either restore or remove the structure. After that, we begin violation proceedings. 12 months. If Marianne somehow won, which she wouldn't, she'd have 1 year to transform a $250,000 disaster into something livable or lose everything. Any other questions? A woman near the front, expensively dressed with perfectly manicured nails, raised her hand. Her voice carried that particular tone of someone used to being taken seriously. "What's the town's position on residential versus commercial development?" Mayor Winters smiled thinly. "The property is currently zoned residential historic. Any change would require planning board approval, which for a property on the historic register would be challenging." The woman, must be the developer, frowned. Translation: the town didn't want condos, but wouldn't outright say it. "Final question?" The mayor waited, then nodded. "Then we'll proceed with bids. You have 5 minutes to complete your sealed bid forms. Minimum bid is $1. Forms must be signed and include proof of funds. Harold will collect them." Marianne stared at the form Harold had given her during registration. There was a line for bid amount and a space for proof of funds documentation. She brought her bank statement showing $83.16 in her checking account. She could write down $1 and make the minimum bid, but there was no point. Someone would bid higher, probably multiple someones. Sophie shifted on her lap. "Mama, are you going to buy the house with the face?" "I don't think so, baby. But you said it could be our home." "I know, but sometimes things don't work out the way we hope." Marianne looked around the room at the competition. The demolition companies with their clipboards and professional calculations. The developer with her expensive suit and confidence. The salvage company representative examining photos of interior architectural elements with appraising eyes. And then there was her, a medical receptionist with $83 to her name, a daughter who deserved better, and a dream that was about to die because she couldn't afford to even compete. She wrote $1 on the bid form, signed it, attached her pathetic bank statement. At least she'd tried. At least Sophie would know her mother had tried. Harold collected the bids in a locked box, his expression carefully neutral when he took Marianne's form. She noticed he looked at her longer than he did the other bidders, something unreadable in his eyes. Mayor Winters opened the box with great ceremony, extracting the sealed envelopes one at a time. I'll read them in the order received. The first bid, one of the demolition companies, was $4,500. The second, another demolition company, was $5,000. The third, the salvage company, was $12,000. The fourth, the developer, was $15,000. Marianne stopped listening. It was over. She should just leave now, save herself the humiliation of having her $1 bid read aloud to a room full of people who could actually afford to solve problems with money. The fifth bid, Mayor Winters' voice pulled her back. $7,500. The sixth bid, $8,000. Two more bids followed, $6,000 and $10,000. And then the mayor reached the final envelope. Marianne watched with the detached numbness that comes from accepting defeat. The final bid is from. The mayor paused, her expression shifting to something that might have been surprise or confusion. Marianne Cole, $1. The room erupted in laughter. Not cruel exactly, but the kind of laughter that comes from pure absurdity. Someone actually bid $1 when the next lowest bid was $4,500. Marianne felt her face burning. Sophie pressed closer, sensing her mother's humiliation. Mayor Winters banged her gavel. "Order, please." When the room quieted, she continued. "The highest bid is $15,000 from Westfield Development Group, represented by Amanda Westfield. However, before I can declare a winner, I need to verify proof of funds from." "Excuse me, Mayor Winters." Harold Pemberton stood, and his voice carried an authority Marianne hadn't heard before. "I need to read something into the record before you proceed." The mayor looked annoyed. "Harold, this isn't the time for. It's directly relevant to this property and this auction." Harold pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age. "This is the deed transfer from 1847, when Thomas Blackwood originally purchased the land and built the manor. It includes a covenant that I don't believe anyone has read in about 150 years. He began to read, his voice clear and formal. "This property, known as Blackwood Manor, shall be held in trust for the Blackwood family in perpetuity. Should the family line end without heirs, the property shall revert to public trust with the following stipulation. It must be sold to an individual or family intending to restore and inhabit it as a residence, for a sum not to exceed $1, ensuring that persons of modest means might find sanctuary, as Thomas Blackwood himself once sought refuge on these grounds." The room went completely silent. Harold continued. "Thomas Blackwood was a freed slave who made his fortune in shipping. He built this house as a station on the Underground Railroad and as proof that former slaves could create generational wealth. The covenant was his way of ensuring that if his descendants couldn't maintain it, someone else without means might have the same opportunity he had." Mayor Winters reached for the document, examining it with several other council members. Her expression was a complicated mix of surprise, resignation, and what might have been respect. "If this covenant is legally binding," Amanda Westfield's voice cut through the silence, sharp with anger, "we should have been informed before the auction. This is highly irregular." "The covenant is filed with the property deed," Harold responded calmly. "It's a matter of public record. The fact that nobody's read the full deed in a century and a half isn't the town's fault." Another council member, an elderly man with thick glasses, nodded slowly. "I remember my grandfather mentioning something about Blackwood Manor having unusual deed restrictions. We always assumed they'd expired." Mayor Winters conferred with the town attorney in hushed whispers while the room waited. Finally, she returned to the microphone. "The covenant appears to be legally binding and has no expiration date. Given that the Blackwood family line ended without heirs, the restrictions are active." She looked directly at Marianne. "Ms. Cole, you bid $1, and according to your submitted proof of funds, you have the means to pay it. Do you intend to restore and inhabit Blackwood Manor as a primary residence?" Marianne stood on shaking legs. "Yes, ma'am." "Then, according to the covenant terms, your bid satisfies the legal requirements. Blackwood Manor is yours for $1, Ms. Cole." The room erupted again, some people clapping, others protesting, Amanda Westfield demanding her attorney be called. But through it all, Marianne stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She bought a mansion for $1. She bought a disaster for $1. She bought a future, maybe, for $1. Sophie was tugging at her arm, jumping up and down. Mama, we got the house. We got the house with the face." Harold approached with paperwork and an expression that was impossible to read. "Congratulations, Miss Cole. You're now the owner of one of Connecticut's most notorious properties. Did you know?" Marianne's voice came out as a whisper. "About the covenant, I remembered something about deed restrictions when I saw how desperate you were yesterday. Did some research last night. Thomas Blackwood wanted his house to help people the way it helped him." Harold smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Looks like it just did." The paperwork took an hour to complete. Marianne signed her name so many times it stopped looking like a word. She paid her $1, handed over a single crumpled bill that Harold solemnly deposited in an envelope marked property sale payment. She was now responsible for property taxes, $4,800 annually, insurance, if she could even get insurance on a building in that condition, and $400,000 worth of restoration needs. But she had walls and a roof and land. She had a building that legally couldn't be taken from her as long as she was making good faith efforts to restore it. She had 12 months. Outside the council chambers, as the autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, several people approached. Amanda Westfield first, her expression cold and calculating. "I'll give you $20,000 for it right now. You make a profit, avoid the headache of restoration, walk away happy." "It's not for sale," Marianne heard herself say. $25,000. Cash. Today. "No." Amanda's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're taking on. That building should be condemned. You're going to fail, lose everything, and end up worse off than when you started." "Maybe," Marianne met her eyes steadily, "but it will be my failure." After Amanda stormed off, one of the demolition company owners approached, a weathered man in his 60s who introduced himself as Frank Morrison. "I was going to win that bid and tear it down," he said bluntly. "But I'll tell you something for free since you're stuck with it now. That ivy needs to come down immediately. Every day you wait, more damage happens. Cut all the vines at the base, let them die, remove them carefully. Don't try to save money by rushing it. You'll just destroy whatever's underneath." "I don't have money for professional removal," Marianne admitted. Frank studied her for a long moment. "I'll make you a deal. I got a crew that's between jobs for the next 2 weeks. We'll come out and cut the vines at the base, do the initial work. $3,000, which is about a quarter of what I'd normally charge. Not charity," he added quickly. "I've got a soft spot for historic buildings. Hate seeing them destroyed." $3,000 she didn't have, but she nodded anyway. "Give me 2 weeks to figure out the money. Please." The first night in Blackwood Manor, Marianne and Sophie slept in the car parked in the overgrown driveway. They'd returned to the apartment long enough to grab sleeping bags, some clothes, and Sophie's stuffed rabbit before the landlord could stop them. There was no point in staying somewhere she was being evicted from anyway, not when she actually owned, a building 45 minutes away, even if that building was currently uninhabitable. Sophie had been thrilled by the adventure of it all, treating their car camping like a sleepover under the stars. But Marianne lay awake most of the night, staring through the windshield at the dark silhouette of her new property, wondering what fresh madness had possessed her. The house loomed in the darkness, its ivy-covered bulk blocking out stars, the face-like pattern of vines somehow even more disturbing in the moonlight. It looked like the building was watching her, judging her, waiting to see if she'd run away like everyone else had. She wouldn't run. She couldn't. There was nowhere left to run to. Morning came cold and bright, frost coating the car windows and making Sophie's breath fog the glass. Marianne's back ached from sleeping in the driver's seat, and her phone showed 3 missed calls from work. She'd have to deal with that soon. Probably get fired for the unexcused absence, but right now she had more immediate concerns, like how to turn an ivy-covered disaster into something resembling a home. Harold Pemberton arrived at 8 a.m. in his pickup truck with 2 thermoses of coffee and a cardboard box of donuts. "Figured you might need breakfast." Marianne accepted the coffee gratefully, the warmth of it bringing feeling back to her frozen fingers. "You didn't have to do this." "Yeah, I did." Harold settled onto the hood of his truck, surveying the mansion with a practiced eye. "I've been managing this property for the town for 15 years. Always felt guilty that we let it get to this state. Thomas Blackwood built something remarkable, and we just abandoned it." Sophie emerged from the car, attracted by the smell of donuts, and Harold handed her a chocolate glazed with grandfatherly gentleness. "How'd you sleep, Miss Sophie?" "Like camping." Sophie's enthusiasm was undimmed by sleeping in a car. "Can we go inside today, Mama? Can we see the dollhouse again?" "We'll see, baby." Marianne turned to Harold. "What's the first step? Legally, I mean." "The mayor said I have 12 months to restore or remove the structure." "What does restore actually mean in terms of the town's requirements? Harold pulled out a folder he'd brought. I printed the relevant ordinances. Basically, you need to show good faith progress toward making the building safe and habitable. That means addressing immediate safety hazards, preventing further deterioration, and demonstrating that you're actively working on restoration. How do they measure good faith progress? Monthly inspections by the building department. They'll document what you've done, whether the property is improving or declining. As long as you're moving forward, they'll work with you. Harold's expression grew more serious. But if you stop making progress, or if the building becomes an immediate public safety hazard, they can revoke your ownership and condemn it. The weight of it settled over Marianne like a physical thing. She had 12 months to perform a miracle with resources she didn't have. Frank Morrison's offer, Harold continued. The ivy removal. That's your first priority. The building department's first inspection is in 2 weeks. If you can show them you've started addressing the vegetation, that'll buy you goodwill. I don't have $3,000. Then you need to get creative. Harold pulled out a business card. This is Patricia Chun. She runs a community development nonprofit that helps people with historic property preservation. They can't fund full restorations, but they might be able to help with emergency stabilization. Marianne took the card, adding it to the growing collection of resources she couldn't quite believe existed. Why are you helping me? Really? Harold looked at the house for a long moment before answering. My grandfather was one of the people Thomas Blackwood helped. 1852, my great-great-grandfather escaped from a plantation in Virginia. Made it as far as Connecticut before he collapsed in those woods. He pointed to the forest surrounding the property. Thomas Blackwood found him, hid him in the house for 3 weeks while slave catchers searched the area, then got him safely to Canada. His voice grew thick with emotion. My family exists because Thomas Blackwood risked everything to help a stranger. The least I can do is make sure his house helps one more person. That afternoon, Marianne called Patricia Chun from the nonprofit. The woman who answered had a kind voice and the practiced patience of someone used to dealing with desperate property owners. Blackwood Manor, Patricia said when Marianne explained the situation. I've been watching that property for years, hoping someone would save it. The town was wrong to let it deteriorate so badly. She agreed to come out the next morning for an assessment. Meanwhile, Marianne needed to deal with more immediate concerns, like the fact that they needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't a car, and she needed to figure out her job situation. The call to her supervisor went about as well as expected. Marianne, you've called in sick 3 times this month, and yesterday you just didn't show up at all. Linda's voice carried disappointment rather than anger, which somehow made it worse. I try to be understanding about your situation, but the office can't function when you're unreliable. I know. I'm so sorry. Something came up. Something always comes up. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. You can pick up your final check on Friday. The line went dead, and Marianne sat at her car, staring at the phone, feeling the walls close in. No job meant no income. No income meant no money for food, gas, the property taxes due in 3 months, or the $3,000 Frank Morrison was charging to cut down the ivy. Sophie was playing in the overgrown yard, making a game of trying to find the old garden beds under the weeds. She didn't know they'd just gone from desperate to catastrophic. Marianne did something she rarely allowed herself. She put her head on the steering wheel and cried. Real sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. The kind of crying that happened when you'd held yourself together for too long and something finally snapped. She cried for her failed marriage and mounting debt, for the job she'd just lost and the daughter who deserved better, for the massive, impossible building sitting in front of her that she'd somehow believed she could save. A knock on the car window made her jump. An elderly woman stood there, probably in her 70s, wearing gardening gloves and a concerned expression. Marianne rolled down the window, wiping her face. I'm sorry, I'm okay. You're clearly not okay, dear. The woman's accent had the particular rhythm of rural Connecticut. I'm Dorothy Fletcher. I live in that house. She pointed to a small farmhouse visible through the trees about a quarter-mile away. I saw someone had finally bought Blackwood Manor. Are you the new owner? Yes. Marianne Cole. She tried to pull herself together. This is my daughter, Sophie. Dorothy smiled at Sophie, who had wandered over curiously. Well, welcome to the neighborhood. I've been hoping someone would finally save this place. Thomas Blackwood was a remarkable man. My great-grandmother knew him. Used to tell stories about the people he helped. Everyone keeps telling me about Thomas Blackwood, Marianne said, her voice still thick from crying. How he helped people, how remarkable he was. But right now I'm just a woman with no job, no money, and a house that needs hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs I can't afford. Dorothy studied her for a long moment. Can I show you something? She led Marianne and Sophie around the side of Blackwood Manor to where the ivy was particularly thick. Dorothy pushed through the vines, which clearly had thorns that caught on their clothes, and revealed something Marianne had missed during her initial tour. A stone marker, barely visible beneath the vegetation. Dorothy cleared away enough growth to reveal the engraving. Sanctuary offered here 1847 to 1865. All who seek refuge shall find it. Thomas Blackwood. He meant it, Dorothy said softly. Every word. This house was built to provide sanctuary to people with nowhere else to go. You're not the first person to arrive here desperate and afraid. You're just the first in a very long time. Something in Marianne's chest loosened slightly. That's a beautiful story, but stories don't pay for ivy removal or property taxes. No, but community does. Dorothy pulled out her phone. Give me until tomorrow. I have some calls to make. That night, Marianne and Sophie made camp in the least overgrown corner of what had been the Manor's library. Harold had helped them bring in their belongings and set up a camping lantern. It wasn't much, but it was inside, sheltered from the October cold, and it was theirs. Sophie fell asleep quickly in her sleeping bag, exhausted by the day's adventures. Marianne sat with her laptop, running on the last 15% of battery, searching for any kind of assistance program, loan, grant, anything that might help. The numbers mocked her. Historic preservation grants required matching funds she didn't have. Emergency housing assistance didn't apply to people who technically owned property. Small business loans needed credit scores higher than her rock-bottom rating. She was about to close the laptop when she noticed something odd about the wall she was leaning against. The plaster felt different there, hollower. She knocked softly, and the sound confirmed it. There was a space behind the wall. Hidden compartment? Secret room? Or just old house construction creating random hollow spaces? She decided to investigate in the morning. Right now, exhaustion was pulling her towards sleep despite her racing mind. Patricia Chun arrived at 9 a.m. sharp in a sensible sedan, accompanied by a younger man she introduced as Marcus Rodriguez, a historic preservation specialist. They spent 2 hours examining every accessible part of the property, taking photos, making notes, occasionally exclaiming over some architectural detail visible beneath the ivy. This is an absolute treasure, Patricia said as they reconvened outside. 1847 construction, nearly all original materials. If properly restored, this would be one of the most significant historic properties in Connecticut. But the ivy is destroying it, yes. Every day it stays attached, more damage happens. Patricia consulted her notes. Here's what I can offer. Our Emergency Stabilization Fund can provide $5,000 toward immediate interventions that prevent further deterioration. That covers Frank Morrison's ivy cutting, plus materials for temporary weather protection. Marianne felt tears spring to her eyes again. $5,000? You can just give me $5,000. Our mission is preserving historic properties. Blackwood Manor qualifies. Patricia's expression softened. But Marianne, I have to be honest. $5,000 solves your immediate crisis. The full restoration will cost $300,000 minimum, probably closer to $500,000 given what we've seen. I don't have that kind of funding. I know. Marianne steadied herself. But it buys me time to figure something out. Marcus, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. There might be another option. Have you checked if there are any historical society grants or preservation tax credits available? Sometimes properties on the Underground Railroad have special funding opportunities. I don't even know how to research that. I'll help you, Marcus offered. This is exactly the kind of project I love working on. And honestly, If we can document the Underground Railroad connection definitively, you might qualify for National Historic Landmark status, which opens up federal funding. After Patricia and Marcus left with promises to return with the funding paperwork, Dorothy Fletcher appeared again, this time with 5 other people in tow. Marianne, these are your neighbors. Dorothy introduced them one by one. James and Rita Washington, a retired couple from 2 miles down the road. Father Miguel Santos from St. Catherine's Church. Karen Liu, who owned a farm stand on Route 44. And Bill and Susan Morton, who ran Morton's Hardware in town. Dorothy's been telling us about your situation, James Washington said. His voice carried quiet authority. We'd like to help. I don't understand. Rita smiled. Thomas Blackwood helped my ancestors too. My great-great-great-grandmother was one of the people he sheltered. This house represents something important, not just historically, but morally. We can't let it be destroyed. Father Miguel stepped forward. The church has a volunteer program. We can organize work days, clearing vegetation, cleaning, basic repairs. Not professional work, but labor. Many hands make light work, yes. Karen Liu nodded. My farm stand does decent business. I can donate a portion of proceeds each week to a Blackwood Manor restoration fund. Probably $100 to $200 weekly. Bill Morton added, hardware store can provide materials at cost. Not free, but it'll save you about 40% on everything you need. Marianne couldn't speak. She just stood there, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers who had no reason to help her except that they valued what her house represented. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you all do this? Dorothy answered for them all. Because Thomas Blackwood taught this community what sanctuary means. And because sometimes helping someone else is how we honor the people who helped us. The first volunteer work day was scheduled for Saturday, 3 days away. In the meantime, Frank Morrison's crew arrived to begin the ivy removal. Frank brought 4 workers and equipment that looked like it belonged in a war zone. Industrial cutters, protective gear, scaffolding. He walked Marianne through the process with surprising gentleness. We're going to cut every vine at the base, about 6 inches from the ground. Then we wait. Ivy takes 4 to 6 weeks to die completely. Once it's dead and dried out, we can start carefully removing it without damaging what's underneath. Trying to pull live ivy off would rip the siding right off with it. 4 to 6 weeks of looking at dead ivy. Better than 4 to 6 more weeks of living ivy destroying your foundation. Frank smiled. Trust me, this is the right way. Watching the crew work was oddly satisfying. They moved through the property systematically, cutting through vines as thick as tree trunks, pulling the growth away from the foundation, treating the stumps with herbicide to prevent regrowth. Sophie was fascinated, following the workers around and asking endless questions that they answered with surprising patience. One of the crew, a young man named Miguel who couldn't have been more than 25, took time to explain what they were doing and why. See how the roots have grown into the mortar? He pointed to where ivy had literally forced its way between the stones. That's what causes the real damage. When we remove the ivy, we'll see how much mortar needs to be replaced. Will the house fall down? Sophie's question was serious. Nah, this place was built solid. Stone foundation, timber frame construction. They knew how to build things to last back then. It's hurt, but not beyond saving. By the end of the first day, the transformation was already visible. The crew had cut all the ivy on the front and east side of the house, revealing glimpses of the structure underneath. The siding was damaged in places, yes, but the bones showed through beautiful Victorian architecture that had survived 177 years. The face was still there, but now it looked different. Less like something screaming and more like something waiting to breathe. That evening, Marianne received a call from an unknown number. Ms. Cole, this is Richard Thornton. I'm a documentary filmmaker specializing in historic preservation projects. I heard about Blackwood Manor, and I'd love to discuss featuring your restoration in a series I'm producing. Marianne's exhaustion made her blunt. I don't have time for this. I'm sorry. Wait, hear me out. We document your restoration journey, but more importantly, we provide a stipend for filming access. $20,000, paid in installments as work progresses. Plus, the publicity would help with fundraising. $20,000. Marianne's heart began to race. What's the catch? No catch. We need access to film maybe 10 hours a week, interview you periodically, document the work. The story of a single mother saving a historic Underground Railroad station. That's compelling television. And frankly, we've got budget allocated for this series that we need to spend. Can I think about it? Of course. I'll email you a contract proposal. Take your time. After hanging up, Marianne found Harold's number and called to ask if this was legitimate or some kind of scam. Richard Thornton is respected in historic preservation circles, Harold confirmed. If he's offering to pay you, take it. $20,000 would solve a lot of problems. That night, lying in her sleeping bag in the library, Marianne pulled out her laptop and began researching everything she could about Blackwood Manor's history. If Marcus was right about potential funding for Underground Railroad sites, she needed documentation. She found references to Thomas Blackwood in digitized newspaper archives from the 1850s. Articles about his shipping business, his unexpected wealth, speculation about his mysterious past. One article from 1863 described him as a man of remarkable character who has made his fortune available to noble causes. Noble causes. The Underground Railroad. She found census records showing that Blackwood Manor had been one of the largest properties in the area, employing several people and housing an unusually large number of boarders for private residence, probably code for the people being sheltered there. But it was a letter she found in the Connecticut Historical Society's digital archives that stopped her breath. A letter from Thomas Blackwood to Frederick Douglass, dated 1859, discussing the sacred work of providing sanctuary to souls seeking freedom. The letter was brief but powerful. I've been blessed beyond measure with wealth I did not earn through virtue, but through fortune. The only moral use of such blessing is to extend it to others. My home stands as a beacon for those who have been denied what should be every person's birthright, freedom and safety. Should I fall, I pray that another will take up this torch. Should I fall, I pray that another will take up this torch. Marianne stared at those words, feeling something shift inside her chest. She wasn't just restoring a building. She was continuing a legacy. Thomas Blackwood had built this house as a sanctuary. It had fallen into ruin, and now it was her turn to raise it back up. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear, the kind of day that made outdoor work almost enjoyable. Father Miguel had spread the word through his church and beyond, and by 8 a.m., nearly 30 people had assembled in Blackwood Manor's overgrown yard. Dorothy Fletcher had organized them with military efficiency. Teams for different tasks, clearing brush and weeds from the property, removing debris from inside the house, boarding up broken windows, checking the roof for immediate leaks that needed emergency patching. Frank Morrison's crew had finished cutting the ivy 2 days earlier, and now the dead vines hung like grim decorations, making the house look even more haunting. But beneath them, the structure was visible, damaged but dignified, waiting. Marianne stood on the front steps, now cleared of ivy, and addressed the gathered volunteers. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. I don't know how to thank you all. A month ago, I was facing eviction with nowhere to go. Today, I'm standing in front of a house that's falling apart, but it's my house. And with your help, maybe it can be something more. A home, a sanctuary, what Thomas Blackwood intended. The work began with surprising organization. Rita Washington led the outdoor clearing team, attacking the overgrown gardens with a vigor that belied her 70-some years. James Washington and Bill Morton took charge of the structural assessment, carefully examining the foundation, walls, and roof. Karen Liu and Susan Morton organized the interior cleaning crew, dividing people into teams that worked through the house room by room, removing years of dirt, dead leaves, and the debris that accumulates when a building sits empty for nearly 2 decades. Father Miguel's church youth group tackled the massive job of removing all the items that couldn't be salvaged: rotted furniture, broken fixtures, debris. A dumpster had been donated by Morrison Waste Management, Frank Morrison's brother's company. Sophie made herself useful fetching water bottles, holding flashlights, and generally keeping spirits up with her enthusiasm. She'd appointed herself official tour guide, showing volunteers the dollhouse room and explaining to everyone who would listen about Mr. Thomas Blackwood and the Underground Railroad. By noon, the transformation was remarkable. The yard looked like property again instead of jungle. The interior was cleared enough that you could actually see the room's potential, and the broken windows were boarded up properly, protecting the interior from weather. During lunch, Dorothy had organized a potluck, with everyone bringing food to share. Marianne noticed James Washington examining one of the walls in what had been the dining room. Something wrong? Not wrong exactly. James ran his hand along the wall. Just interesting. This wall is newer than the rest, maybe built in the 1920s or 30s. And it's not load-bearing. It's just dividing what was probably a larger room. Marianne remembered the hollow sound she'd noticed in the library. Could there be hidden spaces in the house? Places that got walled over during renovations? Almost certainly. Houses this old were modified constantly. Rooms divided, additions built, updates made. Wouldn't surprise me if there are spaces that have been sealed off for a century. James knocked on the wall, listening to the sound. This one's definitely hollow. Might just be a closet that got closed up, but could be something more interesting. That evening, after the volunteers had left and Sophie was asleep, Marianne stood in the library with a flashlight, examining the wall more carefully. The hollow sound was unmistakable. She knocked along the wall until she found a spot where the sound changed, became more resonant, like there was a larger space beyond. She found a seam in the wallpaper, barely visible, but there. Following it with her fingers, she traced what looked like a door frame that had been plastered over and papered. A door that led somewhere. She needed tools to open it properly without destroying the wall. But the knowledge that there was something hidden there, a secret space in a house built by a man who sheltered people with secrets, that kept her awake most of the night with curiosity and possibility. Sunday morning brought Marcus Rodriguez back to the property with a stack of paperwork and excited news. I found it. He spread documents across the hood of his car. Definitive proof that Blackwood Manor was a documented Underground Railroad station. There are receipts, coded letters, journal entries from known conductors. This house was one of the most active stations in Connecticut. Marianne looked through the papers, seeing Thomas Blackwood's name appear again and again. Numbers that looked like shipping manifests, but were actually records of people moved to safety. Letters using business language to disguise their real purpose. What does this mean for funding? It means you can apply for National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Grants, up to $50,000 for restoration of documented sites. There's also Connecticut's Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. You can get tax credits worth 30% of qualified rehabilitation expenses. Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious. Plus, with documentary film coverage, you'll probably attract private donations. How long does the grant process take? The applications are due next month. Decisions usually come in spring, so maybe 6 months. 6 months. She had 12 to make enough progress that the town wouldn't condemn the property. The grant money would arrive with 6 months left, cutting it close, but possible. I'll help you with the applications, Marcus offered. This is important, Marianne, not just for you, but for preserving this piece of history. Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm developed. Marianne found a job working nights as a nurse's aide at a facility 15 minutes from Blackwood Manor. The hours were brutal, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but it paid $18 per hour and let her be present during the day when volunteers came to work on the house. Patricia Chen's $5,000 grant came through, covering Frank Morrison's ivy removal and materials for emergency repairs. The documentary film crew, just Richard Thornton and one camera operator, came twice a week to film progress, and the first $5,000 installment arrived within days. Slowly, impossibly, the house began to emerge from its vegetable prison. The dead ivy came down in sections, carefully removed by volunteers wearing heavy gloves and masks to protect against the dust and allergens. Beneath it, the damage was extensive but not catastrophic. Siding needed repair or replacement in many places. Some windows were broken beyond repair. The front porch had soft spots where moisture had compromised the wood. but the bones remained sound. The stone foundation was solid. The timber frame construction had survived. The house could be saved. The building department inspector came for his first monthly review and seemed surprised by the progress. "Ms. Cole, I'll be honest. I expected to come out here and recommend immediate condemnation. Instead, you've made remarkable progress. The ivy removal alone is a major intervention." He made notes on his clipboard. "Keep this pace up and you'll satisfy the 12-month requirement easily." After he left, Marianne allowed herself a moment of relief. They weren't out of danger. Not even close, but they weren't being condemned. They were making progress. That evening, armed with tools Bill Morton had provided at cost, Marianne carefully began opening the wall in the library. Sophie watched with wide eyes as her mother used a utility knife to cut through layers of wallpaper and plaster. "What if there's treasure in there, Mama?" "I don't think there's treasure, baby. Probably just an old closet." But as the opening grew larger and Marianne shone her flashlight into the space beyond, she realized it wasn't a closet at all. It was a room. A hidden room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with its own door that had been plastered over from the library side. The space was filled with items carefully arranged and preserved. Trunks, boxes, furniture covered with cloth that had somehow resisted complete decay. "Sophie, go get my phone. I need more light." Sophie ran to get it, returning breathlessly. Marianne turned on the phone's flashlight and carefully climbed through the opening into the hidden room. The air inside was stale, but not unpleasant, dry, which had helped preserve everything. The trunks were old, heavy wood with metal bindings. On top of one sat a leather-bound book with Thomas Blackwood embossed on the cover. Marianne opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed, but intact, covered in neat handwriting. A journal. Thomas Blackwood's personal journal. Her hands trembled as she read the first entry. Dated March 15th, 1847. "Today I have completed construction of my home. It stands as testament to both my good fortune and my determination that this fortune be used for noble purpose. I have hidden in these walls a sanctuary within a sanctuary, a space known only to me and to those I trust completely. Here I will keep records of our sacred work, knowing that someday, when it is safe, the truth can be told." Marianne sat back, her heart racing. This wasn't just a hidden room. This was Thomas Blackwood's secret archive, his records of the Underground Railroad work, hidden away until it would be safe to reveal them. She continued reading, entry after entry documenting the people he'd helped. Names, dates, where they'd come from, where they were headed. Some entries were brief. "Sheltered 3 souls, sent north to safety with JT." Others were longer, more personal. "Today we hid Sarah and her infant son in the root cellar while slave catchers searched the property. They're safe now, headed to Canada. I pray they find a freedom all human beings deserve." There were dozens of entries. Hundreds, maybe years of documentation, all carefully preserved in this hidden room. Sophie's head appeared in the opening. "Mama, what did you find?" "History, baby. We found history." But it was what lay in the trunks that would change everything. Marianne opened the first one carefully, expecting more documents. Instead, she found something that made her breath stop completely. The trunk was filled with leather pouches, each carefully tied and labeled. She opened one with shaking hands. Inside were gold coins. Old gold coins, dozens of them, carefully wrapped and preserved. Coins from the 1840s and 50s, each worth not just their gold content, but their historical value as well. Marianne opened another pouch. More gold coins. And another. And another. The trunk was filled with them. She turned to the other trunks, opening each one with increasingly frantic movements. They all contained the same thing. Leather pouches filled with gold coins, carefully labeled and dated. Some pouches were marked donation, J. Stevens, Boston. Others said gift, anonymous benefactor. Still others had notations like proceeds from shipping contract, dedicated to the cause. This wasn't stolen gold. This was money that had been donated to fund the Underground Railroad work, accumulated over years, carefully saved and hidden away by Thomas Blackwood. And there was so much of it. Marianne sat on the floor of the hidden room, surrounded by trunks of gold coins, holding Thomas Blackwood's journal, and tried to process what she'd found. She bought a mansion for $1, and hidden in its walls was a fortune in historical gold coins, money that had been saved to help enslaved people escape to freedom, money that had been hidden away for safety and forgotten when Thomas Blackwood died, money that could restore his house, that could honor his legacy, that could provide the sanctuary he'd always intended. Sophie's voice pulled her back to reality. "Mama, why are you crying?" "Because Mr. Thomas Blackwood left us a gift, baby. A gift that's been waiting in these walls for over 150 years. Waiting for someone who needed sanctuary to find it." Marianne picked up the journal and read the final entry, dated December 20th, 1865, just after the Civil War had ended. "The work continues, though now in different form. I have amassed considerable funds donated to our cause, gold coins given by benefactors who believed in freedom. With the war ended and slavery abolished, I have hidden these funds away, trusting that someday they will serve their original purpose, providing sanctuary to those who need it most. If you are reading this, dear stranger from the future, know that this gold is not mine to claim. It belongs to the cause of human dignity. Use it wisely. Use it well. Continue the work. Continue the work." Marianne made her decision immediately. Tomorrow she would contact Marcus, Patricia, Harold, everyone who had been helping her. She would document everything, do this properly, legally, by the book. But tonight, she would just sit in this hidden room with her daughter and hold the tangible proof that hope could be preserved, that sanctuaries could endure, that sometimes desperate people found exactly what they needed when they needed it most. "Mama, how much gold is there?" Marianne looked at the trunks, doing rough calculations. Each pouch held maybe 20 to 30 coins. There were dozens of pouches in each trunk, and there were 6 trunks. Hundreds of gold coins, each worth thousands of dollars as historical artifacts. "I don't know exactly, baby, but enough. Enough to fix this house. Enough to make it beautiful again. Enough to turn it back into what Mr. Thomas Blackwood wanted it to be, a sanctuary for people who need one." Sophie climbed through the opening and settled into her mother's lap, staring at the gold coins with wonder. "We found treasure. We found more than treasure. We found purpose." Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees surrounding Blackwood Manor. The house stood a little straighter now, unburdened of its ivy prison, its hidden room finally opened, its secrets ready to be told. The face in the vines had been screaming for nearly 2 decades. Now, finally, someone had heard it, and the story was just beginning. Marianne didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hidden room with Thomas Blackwood's journal, reading every entry by the light of her phone, trying to understand the magnitude of what she'd found. Sophie had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up in her sleeping bag in the library, but Marianne couldn't stop reading. Each entry told a story. February 1848. Sheltered the Williams family. Husband, wife, 3 children under age 7. The youngest still nursing. They hid in the root cellar for 5 days while bounty hunters searched the area. I have never prayed so fervently in my life. They departed safely last night, headed for the Canadian border. May 1851. Today marks our 100th soul delivered to freedom. I have kept meticulous records of each, though I burn the names after safe passage is confirmed. The gold accumulates. Donations from abolitionists throughout New England who trust our work. I have hidden it in the room behind the library, accessible only to those who know where to look. Should I fall, may it serve the cause even after my death. November 1857. A close call today. Federal marshals with a warrant searched the entire property. The hidden room went undiscovered, praise God. The family of 6 sheltered there remained silent through 6 hours of searching. This gold represents more than money. It represents the faith that good people have placed in this work. I will guard it with my life. The final entries from late 1865 revealed Thomas Blackwood's struggle with what to do with the accumulated funds now that slavery had been abolished. He'd considered donating it to newly freed communities, to schools being established for formerly enslaved children, to churches doing reconstruction work in the South. But his final decision, laid out in beautiful, measured handwriting, was both practical and hopeful. I am old now, my health failing. The work of the Underground Railroad is complete, but the need for sanctuary endures. There will always be people fleeing persecution, escaping danger, seeking refuge from circumstances beyond their control. I have designed this house with that truth in mind. The hidden room, the sanctuary within a sanctuary, will remain sealed until someone with true need discovers it. The gold will wait when it is found, and I believe it will be found when the time is right. May it provide the same sanctuary this house has provided for so many. That is my prayer. That is my covenant. Marianne closed the journal carefully, her vision blurred with tears. She had been that person, fleeing eviction, escaping poverty, seeking refuge from circumstances beyond her control. And she had found exactly what Thomas Blackwood had left waiting. At 6 a.m., unable to wait any longer, she called Marcus Rodriguez. His groggy voice answered on the fourth ring. "Marianne, it's 6 in the morning. Is everything okay? I found something in the house. I need you to come see it. Now." Something in her voice must have conveyed the urgency, because Marcus's tone sharpened immediately. "I'll be there in an hour." She called Patricia Chin next, then Harold Pemberton. By 8 a.m., all three were standing in her library, staring at the opening she'd cut into the wall. "You found a hidden room," Harold said slowly. "You actually found Thomas Blackwood's hidden room." "There were rumors," Patricia added, her voice hushed with awe. "Stories that he'd built secret spaces into the house. But after 150 years, most historians assumed they were just legends." Marianne led them through the opening one by one. The sight of the hidden room, the trunks, the carefully preserved pouches of gold coins, left all three momentarily speechless. Marcus picked up the journal with trembling hands, reading the passages Marianne pointed out. "This is extraordinary. This is documentation of Underground Railroad activity from a primary source. Most records were destroyed for safety. This is..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia opened one of the trunks, examining the gold coins with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing. "These are period coins. 1840s, 1850s. Gold eagles, double eagles. In this condition, with this provenance, Marianne, do you understand what you found? Tell me." Marianne's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Patricia pulled out her phone, consulting something. "A single 1849 gold eagle in good condition is worth about $2,500 to collectors. Double eagles can go for $3,000 or more. You have..." She looked at the 6 trunks, doing quick calculations. "Roughly how many coins per pouch?" "About 25. Marianne had counted several the night before. "And how many pouches per trunk?" "Maybe 30. Patricia's expression went very still. "That's roughly 750 coins per trunk. 6 trunks, for 1,500 coins. At an average value of $2,500 each, conservatively, you're looking at $11 million. Marcus finished, his voice barely a whisper. The number hung in the air like something physical. $11 million in historical gold coins, hidden in the walls of a house Marianne had bought for $1. Harold sank onto one of the trunks, his weathered face pale. Thomas knew. He knew someone desperate would eventually find it. That's why the covenant specified someone of modest means. He wanted the gold to help the kind of person he'd spend his life helping. "But it's not mine," Marianne said immediately. "This was donated money. It belonged to the Underground Railroad cause. I can't just keep it." Patricia looked at her with an expression of profound respect. "Legally, as the property owner, you have claim to anything found within the structure. Treasure trove law would apply here. But morally, ethically, you're right that this money has a specific purpose." What Thomas Blackwood wrote. Marcus was still reading the journal. He said it should provide sanctuary to whoever found it. That was his intention. You found it because you needed sanctuary. The money is meant for you, Marianne, to restore this house, to continue his work. We need to authenticate everything. Patricia's practical side reasserted itself. Document every coin, verify the journal's authenticity, establish clear provenance. This isn't just about the monetary value. This is a significant historical discovery. And we need legal counsel, Harold added. Before word gets out, before anyone tries to challenge your ownership. We need everything documented and protected. The next week transformed Marianne's life in ways that made her previous desperate circumstances feel like a distant dream. Patricia brought in numismatic experts from Yale University who authenticated the coins one by one, cataloging each piece with reverent precision. Dr. Sarah Kimball, the lead numismatist, handled the coins with white gloves and an expression of barely contained excitement. This collection is remarkable, not just for its size, but for its composition. These are coins donated specifically to fund abolitionist work. Some are rare variants, others have fascinating provenance. The 1854 double eagles alone are worth over $5,000 each. How much total? Marianne asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Dr. Kimball consulted her growing spreadsheet. We're still cataloging, but preliminary assessment suggests the collection's value is significantly higher than initial estimates. Many of these coins are rarer than we thought. We're looking at closer to $15 million. Possibly more. $15 million. Marianne had to sit down. Sophie, who had been watching the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination, climbed into her lap. Is that a lot of money, Mama? Yes, baby. That's a lot of money. Marcus was authenticating Thomas Blackwood's journal with equal care, comparing the handwriting to known samples, analyzing the paper and ink composition, cross-referencing the entries with historical records. Every test confirmed what they already knew. It was genuine, written by Thomas Blackwood himself, documenting years of Underground Railroad activity that historians had suspected but never been able to prove definitively. This journal is worth its weight in gold just as a historical artifact, Marcus explained. But combined with the coins, Marianne, you've discovered one of the most significant Underground Railroad caches ever found. This is front-page news. This is Smithsonian-level discovery, which means, Harold said grimly, that very soon, everyone is going to know about it. And not everyone's intentions will be good. He was right. Despite their efforts to keep the discovery quiet while authentication was ongoing, word began to leak. First locally, Dorothy Fletcher mentioned it to someone at church who mentioned it to someone else. Then regionally, a student working with the Yale team posted something vague on social media that attracted attention. Within 2 weeks, reporters were calling. Small local papers at first, then larger regional outlets. Richard Thornton, the documentary filmmaker, was ecstatic. This elevated his project from interesting restoration story to major historical discovery. And then the challenges began. Amanda Westfield, the developer who tried to buy Blackwood Manor at auction, filed a lawsuit claiming that Marianne had concealed material facts about the property's contents during the bidding process. Her lawyers argued that if the gold's existence had been known, the bidding would have been substantially different. The lawsuit was transparently frivolous. Marianne hadn't known about the gold either, and property sales were explicitly as-is, with no warning of contents. But it required legal response, which meant lawyers, which meant money Marianne didn't have yet since the coins couldn't be sold until their status was legally determined. Then came Gerald Blackwood III. He appeared at the property on a Tuesday afternoon, emerging from Mercedes sedan, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marianne had earned all last year. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of polished appearance that came from generations of wealth and the absolute confidence it bred. Ms. Cole, he extended his hand, which Marianne shook warily. I'm Gerald Blackwood. Thomas Blackwood was my great-great-great-grandfather. Marianne's heart sank. I didn't know there were any living Blackwood descendants. The family line went through Thomas's sister. I'm a direct descendant, and I'm here to discuss the considerable assets you've discovered on what is, legally speaking, family property. Harold, who had been working on the porch and overheard, stepped forward. The property was sold legally through tax auction after the last direct heir died, without claiming it. Marianne owns it free and clear. The property, yes, but the contents? Gerald's smile was practiced and cold. Coins and documents that belong to my ancestor? That's a different matter. I'm prepared to offer Ms. Cole $500,000 for immediate transfer of all items found in the hidden room. They're not for sale, Marianne said firmly. Gerald's expression hardened. Then I'll see you in court. My family's legacy isn't going to be claimed by someone who paid $1 at a tax sale. After he left, Harold made calls to Marcus and Patricia. An emergency meeting was convened in the library, now cleared of ivy and debris, beginning to show hints of its former grandeur. Can he actually claim the contents? Marianne asked, fear making her voice tight. Marcus shook his head. It's complicated. In Connecticut, treasure trove found within a property generally belongs to the property owner. But if he can prove direct lineage and argue the items were family heirlooms rather than treasure trove, he might have a case. Thomas Blackwood's journal is very clear, Patricia countered. He didn't consider the gold his personal property. It was donated funds held in trust for a specific purpose, and that purpose was to provide sanctuary to whoever needed it. His covenant on the property deed reinforces this. He wanted the house to help people of modest means. We need a really good lawyer, Harold said bluntly. Someone who specializes in property law, historical artifacts, and treasure trove cases. That lawyer turned out to be Evelyn Masters, a 60-year-old African-American attorney from New Haven who had built her career on exactly these kinds of complex cases. She arrived at Blackwood Manor 2 days later, read through all the documentation with laser-like focus, and delivered her assessment with characteristic bluntness. Gerald Blackwood has a weak case, but he has money to make it expensive. He'll drag this out, file motion after motion, try to exhaust your resources until you settle for less than you deserve. Evelyn's eyes were sharp behind her reading glasses. But we have something he doesn't. Thomas Blackwood's clear written intent. That journal is our strongest evidence. He explicitly stated the gold should help whoever found it. No court is going to override a direct written statement of intent. How long will this take? Marianne asked. Months, possibly a year. But I'm confident we'll win. Evelyn's expression softened. Marianne, I'm taking this case pro bono. What you're doing here, restoring this house, honoring Thomas Blackwood's legacy, it matters. My great-great-grandmother escaped slavery through the Underground Railroad. Cases like this are why I became a lawyer. The legal battles consumed the next 3 months. Gerald Blackwood filed for an injunction preventing Marianne from selling any of the coins. Amanda Westfield's lawsuit demanded access to appraise the discovery, claiming she had been defrauded. The town building inspector, pressured by local politicians who had connections to the Blackwood family, began citing technical violations that required immediate and expensive remediation. Through it all, Marianne kept working. She continued her night shifts at the nursing facility, coming home exhausted to a house that was slowly being transformed by volunteers who refused to abandon the project despite the legal chaos. The community rallied in ways that brought her to tears regularly. Father Miguel organized a fundraiser at St. Catherine's Church that raised $8,000 for legal expenses. Karen Lou's farm stand donation program was bringing in $150 to $200 weekly, every penny going toward restoration materials. Dorothy Fletcher coordinated volunteer shifts that kept work progressing even when Marianne couldn't be there. And Sophie, remarkable, resilient Sophie, had become a symbol of the project. Richard Thornton's documentary crew captured her explaining the Underground Railroad to school groups that came to tour the property, her 7-year-old voice clear and passionate about Mr. Thomas Blackwood and the people he helped. He gave people a safe place when they had nowhere else to go, Sophie would say, standing in a library that was slowly being restored. Just like he gave me and Mama a safe place. That's what sanctuary means. The footage went viral. A clip of Sophie talking about sanctuary was shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media. Donations began arriving from strangers across the country. $20 here, $50 there, occasionally larger amounts from people moved by the story. But the legal pressure was intensifying. Gerald Blackwood's attorneys filed a motion for immediate possession of the hidden room's contents, arguing that every day they remained with Marianne risked their deterioration or disappearance. The motion was denied, but it required Evelyn to respond, to appear in court, to fight. Amanda Westfield escalated her lawsuit, claiming Marianne had somehow known about the gold before the auction and had conspired with Harold Pemberton to manipulate the bidding process. The accusation was absurd, but it meant Harold had to give depositions, provide documentation, defend his integrity. The town building inspector issued a citation claiming the hidden room's opening had compromised the building's structural integrity and needed immediate professional remediation at an estimated cost of $25,000. It felt like an orchestrated campaign to break her, to force her to give up, take a settlement, walk away from the house and the gold and the legacy she'd found herself fighting to protect. One night, after a particularly brutal deposition where Gerald Blackwood's attorney had implied she was a gold digger who had manipulated her way into ownership, Marianne sat in a library and cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, exhausted sobs that came from a place beyond tiredness. Harold found her there. He'd been working late on the porch restoration, and he simply sat beside her, not saying anything, just present. "I can't do this," Marianne finally said. "I can't keep fighting. Maybe I should just take whatever settlement they offer and walk away." "Do you remember what Thomas Blackwood wrote in his journal?" Harold's voice was gentle. "About the hidden room being a sanctuary within a sanctuary?" "Yes. You're in that sanctuary right now, Marianne. Not just physically, metaphorically. You're in the hard space where everything seems impossible, where the darkness presses in from all sides. But you know what sanctuaries do? They protect. They endure. They outlast the threats outside their walls." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Harold led her outside into the cold December night. They walked around the property, and Marianne saw with fresh eyes the transformation that had occurred over the past 4 months. The ivy was gone completely, revealing the house's Victorian architecture in all its damaged glory. The roof had been repaired where it was actively leaking. The windows were no longer boarded up, but fit, with temporary plexiglass that let light in while keeping weather out. The porch, where Harold had been working, showed beautiful restoration. Hand-carved details carefully repaired, painted with historically accurate colors. The grounds had been cleared, the gardens were visible again, and someone, probably Dorothy, had planted bulbs that would bloom in spring. "Do you see what you've built?" Harold's gesture encompassed everything. "You've created sanctuary for 30, 40 people who come here every week to volunteer. You've given this community a purpose, a project that connects them to their history. You've turned a dying building into a living symbol of what's possible when people care about something bigger than themselves." Marianne looked at the house, her house, and felt something shift. "I'm not giving up." "Good. Because Thomas Blackwood didn't give up when slave catchers searched his property. The people he sheltered didn't give up when they were being hunted. And you don't get to give up just because some entitled descendant and a greedy developer are making your life difficult." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kimball, the numismatist from Yale, had been researching the provenance of the coins and discovered something significant. Several of the donations documented in Thomas Blackwood's journal came from known abolitionist organizations, groups that had kept their own meticulous records. She found correspondence in the Massachusetts Historical Society's archives between Thomas Blackwood and William Lloyd Garrison, discussing the gold's purpose. Garrison's letter, dated 1858, was explicit. "The funds you hold are donated freely by supporters of our cause, with full understanding that they're no longer personal property, but dedicated assets. Should you fall, should the work change, should circumstances shift, these resources remain committed to the cause of human freedom and dignity. They are not yours to claim as inheritance, dear friend. They are our collective investment in a more just world." Evelyn Masters filed the letter as evidence, along with similar documentation from 3 other abolitionist organizations. The message was clear. The gold had been donated with specific restrictions. It wasn't family property that could be inherited. It was trust property dedicated to a purpose. Gerald Blackwood's attorneys tried to argue that the purpose, funding the Underground Railroad, no longer existed. Therefore, the funds should revert to the family. But Thomas Blackwood's journal undermined that argument completely. His final entries explicitly stated the gold should provide sanctuary to whoever found it, continuing the work in new form. The judge assigned to the case was Margaret Shunn, a 70-year-old with a reputation for both scholarly precision and impatience with frivolous arguments. She scheduled a hearing for early March, 6 months after Marianne's discovery. The courtroom was packed. Gerald Blackwood sat with his expensive legal team, exuding confidence. Amanda Westfield was there too, her lawsuit having been consolidated with Gerald's for efficiency. Reporters filled the back rows. And behind Marianne sat her community: Harold, Patricia, Marcus, Dorothy, Father Miguel, Rita and James Washington, Karen Lou, Bill and Susan Morton, and dozens of others who had become invested in her fight. Judge Shunn reviewed all the evidence methodically: the journal entries, the historical correspondence, the deed covenant, the authentication reports, the documentation of Thomas Blackwood's explicit intent. Then she asked a question that cut through all the legal complexity. "Mr. Blackwood, did your ancestor ever meet Ms. Cole?" Gerald's lead attorney stood. "Of course not, Your Honor. Thomas Blackwood died in 1871. Ms. Cole wasn't born for more than a century after. Then how can you claim this gold was intended for your family when Thomas Blackwood explicitly wrote that it was intended for whoever found it in need of sanctuary? He couldn't have known who that person would be, but he trusted that when the time was right, the right person would find it." The attorney tried to respond, but Judge Shunn continued. "Thomas Blackwood built a house as sanctuary for escaped slaves. He accumulated donated funds to support that work. When slavery ended, he hid those funds with explicit written instructions about their purpose. Ms. Cole found them while seeking sanctuary from homelessness. She has used them, is using them, to restore the house so it can provide sanctuary to others. That is exactly what Thomas Blackwood intended." She banged her gavel once, sharp and final. "The gold coins and all contents of the hidden room are the legal property of Ms. Marianne Cole. The property was legally acquired through public auction. The covenant on the deed is enforceable. Gerald Blackwood's claim is denied. Amanda Westfield's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. This case is closed." The courtroom erupted. Marianne sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Sophie, sitting beside her, threw her arms around her mother's neck. "We won, Mama. We get to keep the sanctuary." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marianne gave a brief statement that Richard Thornton helped her prepare. Thomas Blackwood built Blackwood Manor as a sanctuary for people fleeing slavery. He dedicated his life to helping those with nowhere else to go. The gold hidden in his house was never his personal fortune. It was a collective investment in human dignity made by people who believed in freedom. That investment is now being honored exactly as intended. The funds will restore Blackwood Manor, and the restored manor will become a museum, education center, and community space, a sanctuary for everyone who visits. That's what Thomas Blackwood wanted. That's what we're going to build. The questions came rapid fire. How much is the collection worth? Will you sell the coins? What about Gerald Blackwood's family claim to the legacy? Marianne answered each one calmly, with Evelyn at her side providing legal clarity when needed. Yes, the collection was worth approximately $15 million. No, she wouldn't sell all of it. Many of the coins would be displayed in the museum as part of the historical exhibit. Gerald Blackwood's family abandoned the property. She was honoring it. That evening, back at Blackwood Manor, the community threw an impromptu celebration. Someone brought champagne. Someone else brought a cake decorated with a tiny frosting replica of the house. Sophie ran wild with other children whose families had joined the volunteer efforts, playing hide and seek through rooms that were beginning to look like rooms again. Harold pulled Marianne aside. "Thomas Blackwood would be proud of you. I just found what he left. All I did was open a wall. You did more than that. You fought for it. You believed in the purpose behind it. You turned a disaster into a destiny." Harold's eyes were suspiciously bright. "My grandfather was saved by Thomas Blackwood's courage. Now my community is being saved by yours. That legacy continues." The next morning, Marianne met with Patricia, Marcus, and a team of restoration specialists to plan the full renovation. With $15 million in resources, after taxes, legal fees, and strategic reserve, they could do this properly. Not just restore Blackwood Manor, but transform it into something extraordinary. The plan emerged over weeks of careful discussion. The house would be restored to its 1847 glory, preserving every possible original element. The hidden room would become a featured exhibit, with the journal, select coins, and documentation of Thomas Blackwood's Underground Railroad work displayed for visitors. The property would include a museum, a research library for scholars studying the Underground Railroad, and a community center offering meeting space for local organizations. But it's still a home, Marianne insisted. That was Thomas Blackwood's covenant. The person who owns it has to live in it. So we restore the third floor as a private residence. The first and second floors are public. The third floor is where Sophie and I actually live. The architects embraced the challenge. They designed a renovation that would seamlessly blend museum space with living space, preserve history while adding modern necessities, honor the past while serving the present. Frank Morrison's demolition company became the general contractor for the restoration, and Frank threw himself into the project with passionate dedication. I almost tore this place down. Instead, I get to rebuild it. That's redemption right there. The work began in earnest that spring. As April brought the first warm days and the bulbs Dorothy had planted began to bloom, Blackwood Manor buzzed with activity. Professional contractors worked alongside volunteers, restoration specialists guided preservation efforts, and slowly, beautifully, the house emerged from its long suffering. The exterior siding was repaired or replaced using historically accurate materials. Windows were restored or carefully replicated. The roof was completely rebuilt with period-appropriate slate tiles. The porch, with its intricate Victorian woodwork, was reconstructed to match photographs from the 1870s. Inside, the transformation was even more dramatic. Plaster walls were repaired, their original decorative details painstakingly restored. Hardwood floors were refinished, revealing wood grain that hadn't been visible in decades. Fireplaces were cleaned and restored, their hand-painted tiles brought back to life. The library, where Marianne had found the hidden room, became the emotional centerpiece. The wall opening was preserved but protected behind glass, allowing visitors to see into the sanctuary within a sanctuary. Thomas Blackwood's journal was displayed in a climate-controlled case, open to the final entry about continuing the work. The trunks sat empty but preserved, testament to what they had held. Select gold coins were displayed in secure cases, each with explanation of its historical significance and the abolitionist organization that had donated it. But many coins were sold at auction, where collectors paid premium prices for pieces with such extraordinary provenance. The sales generated the full funding needed for the restoration and endowment for the property's permanent maintenance. The dollhouse, Elizabeth Blackwood's perfect miniature replica of the manor, was conserved and displayed in what had been her bedroom, surrounded by information about the Blackwood family and the house's history. Sophie adopted the room as her favorite, spending hours there reading to visitors about Elizabeth and her love for the house. Summer brought an unexpected visitor. Gerald Blackwood III appeared one afternoon without warning, standing in the driveway looking up at the house that was now clearly visible, magnificent in its restored Victorian glory. Marianne, who was overseeing installation of the museum signage, approached him warily. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Cole." He looked at her, and his expression was complicated, part resentment, part something that might have been respect. "I came to see what you've done with my ancestors' house. Would you like a tour?" They walked through the house together, Marianne explaining each restoration decision, each preserved element, each way they had honored Thomas Blackwood's legacy. Gerald said little, but his eyes took in everything. Finally, standing in the library before the hidden room exhibit, he spoke. "My father told me stories about Thomas Blackwood, how he shamed the family by working with abolitionists, how he squandered the family fortune on criminals and runaways. I grew up believing he was a fool who destroyed our legacy." He paused, looking at the journal displayed behind glass. "I was wrong. He didn't destroy our legacy. He created one. and you've honored it in a way the family never did." Gerald reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "These are letters from Thomas Blackwood to his sister, my direct ancestor. He wrote about the house, the work, his hopes for the future. I think they belong here in the museum. A donation from the family." Marianne took the envelope with trembling hands. "Thank you. No, thank you. For showing me what my ancestor actually stood for." Gerald extended his hand, and this time when Marianne shook it, the gesture felt genuine. "I'm sorry for the lawsuit. I was protecting what I thought was mine. I didn't understand it was never supposed to be anyone's. It was supposed to be everyone's." The grand opening was scheduled for October 15th, exactly 1 year after Marianne had seen the auction listing for a $1 ivy-covered mansion. The date was chosen deliberately, a full-circle moment that Richard Thornton's documentary captured beautifully. The week before the opening, Marianne stood in the third-floor apartment that was now her and Sophie's home. It was beautiful. High ceilings restored original details, modern kitchen and bathroom seamlessly integrated, windows overlooking the property that was now carefully landscaped and maintained. She thought about the studio apartment they'd been evicted from, the pull-out couch they'd shared, the constant fear that had characterized their lives. She thought about the foreclosure notice, the desperate midnight scrolling through housing listings, the insane decision to buy a mansion for $1. Sophie bounded into the room, wearing her new dress for the opening ceremony. "Mama, Dorothy says the governor is really coming." "The actual governor?" "Yes, baby, the actual governor." Connecticut's governor had agreed to speak at the opening, along with several state representatives, the mayor, representatives from the National Park Service who were considering adding Blackwood Manor to the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, and scholars from universities across the country. But Marianne was most excited about the other people who would be there, the volunteers who had given hundreds of hours to make this possible, the neighbors who had rallied around a desperate stranger, the community that had embraced a vision of something larger than themselves. The opening day arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear, the trees surrounding Blackwood Manor painted in gold and crimson. By noon, over 500 people had gathered on the property. News crews for national outlets were there. The documentary crew was capturing everything. And at the front stood Marianne, Sophie beside her, looking at the house that had saved them. The ivy was gone completely, replaced by carefully chosen landscaping that complemented rather than obscured the architecture. The house stood proud and beautiful, its Victorian details restored to original splendor. The face that had formed in the vines, that screaming face, was gone. In its place was just a building, magnificent and welcoming. Governor Richardson spoke first, praising the project as an example of community engagement and historical preservation. The mayor followed, acknowledging the town's failure to protect the property and celebrating Marianne's success in restoring it. Then it was Marianne's turn. She stood at the podium with Sophie holding her hand, looking at the hundreds of faces turned toward her. "A year ago," she began, her voice steady, "I was a single mother facing eviction. I had $83 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I found a listing for a mansion covered in ivy, being sold for $1 because nobody else wanted it. I bought it out of desperation, with no plan and no resources. Just a belief that maybe, somehow, it could become a home." She paused, looking at the house behind her. Thomas Blackwood built this house in 1847 as a sanctuary for people with nowhere else to go. For 20 years, he sheltered escaped slaves, risking his freedom and his life to help strangers. He accumulated gold donated by abolitionists across New England, and when slavery ended, he hid that gold in a secret room with instructions. "Let it provide sanctuary to whoever needs it." I needed it. I found it, and I used it exactly as Thomas Blackwood intended, to restore this house so it can continue providing sanctuary. Not the same kind of sanctuary he provided. We don't hide people fleeing slavery anymore. But we do provide sanctuary to anyone seeking connection to our shared history. Anyone wanting to understand the courage of people who risked everything for freedom. Anyone looking for proof that buildings and legacies can be saved when people care enough to save them. She gestured to the crowd. This building stands here today because of all of you. Every volunteer who cut ivy or painted walls or donated time or money. Every neighbor who believed a stranger deserved help. Every person who saw not what this house was, but what it could become. You created sanctuary for me. And now, together, we're creating sanctuary for everyone. The applause was thunderous. Sophie tugged her mother's hand, and Marianne bent down so her daughter could whisper in her ear, "Can I say something, Mama?" Marianne lifted Sophie up to the podium, and the 7-year-old looked at the crowd with complete confidence. Mr. Thomas Blackwood said this house should help people who need help. Me and Mama needed help really bad. We found it here. Now other people can find it too. That's what sanctuary means. A safe place when you don't have anywhere else to go. Thank you for helping us make a safe place. The crowd's response was immediate. Tears, applause, people standing in ovation for a 7-year-old who had just articulated what hundreds of adults had been working toward. The ribbon cutting followed, with Marianne and Sophie wielding comically large scissors to cut the ceremonial barrier. The doors to Blackwood Manor opened officially, and people flooded in to see what had been created. They moved through rooms restored to Victorian splendor. They examined exhibits documenting Thomas Blackwood's Underground Railroad work. They stood in the hidden room, reading journal entries that brought history to life. They saw the gold coins, the letters, the photographs, the stories. And they saw proof that sanctuary could endure. That buildings built for noble purpose could outlast their builders. That sometimes desperate people found exactly what they needed when they needed it most. Dorothy Fletcher found Marianne in the library, both of them watching visitors examine the hidden room exhibit. Thomas Blackwood would be proud. Everyone keeps saying that. Marianne smiled. I hope it's true. It is. He built this place believing in possibilities. You've proven his belief was justified. Dorothy, squeeze her hand. You've built something that will outlast all of us. That's legacy. As evening approached and the official celebration wound down, Marianne walked through the house one more time. The museum spaces were perfect, informative, moving, beautifully designed. The community center rooms were already booked for meetings and events. The research library was stocked with material scholars had been requesting access to for months. And upstairs on the 3rd floor was home. Her home. A sanctuary within a sanctuary, just as Thomas Blackwood had designed. She found Sophie in the apartment, already changed into pajamas despite the early hour, sitting at the window seat that looked out over the property. Mama, this is really ours, right? Forever. Forever, baby. The endowment ensures the property will be maintained in perpetuity. As long as you want to live here, as long as our family wants to live here, this is home. I want to live here forever. I want my kids to live here. I want to be old like Dorothy and tell people stories about Mr. Thomas Blackwood and how he found his treasure. Marianne pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her. This child who had endured so much, who had never stopped believing things could get better. Then that's what we'll do. That night, alone in her bedroom, her actual bedroom, not a pull-out couch or a car or a sleeping bag on a library floor, Marianne opened Thomas Blackwood's journal one more time. She'd read it dozens of times now, but she kept returning to the final entry. Continue the work. She took out a pen and the new journal Marcus had given her, leather-bound like Thomas's, meant to document the restoration process. She opened it to the first page and wrote, October 15th, 2024. Today, Blackwood Manor opened as a museum, education center, and sanctuary. 500 people came to celebrate. A year ago, I was homeless and desperate. I bought this house for $1. I found $15 million in gold coins hidden in its walls. But that's not the real treasure I found here. The real treasure is purpose, community, proof that buildings and people and legacies can be saved when someone cares enough to save them. Thomas Blackwood built this house to provide sanctuary. It provided sanctuary to hundreds of escaped slaves. Then it provided sanctuary to me when I needed it most. Now it will provide sanctuary to anyone who walks through its doors seeking connection to our shared history of courage and hope. I promise to continue the work, to honor what was built here, to ensure this sanctuary endures for generations to come. That is my covenant. That is my purpose. That is what it means to find not just treasure, but home. She closed the journal and turned off the light, looking out the window at the house that had saved her. The moon illuminated its Victorian angles, its carefully restored details, its dignified presence. No more ivy, no more screaming face. Just a building that had stood for 177 years as testament to one man's courage and one woman's desperate hope. Blackwood Manor had been built as sanctuary. It had been abandoned and nearly lost. It had been saved by the person who needed it most. And now it would stand for another 177 years, continuing the work, providing sanctuary to all who sought it. The vines had grown into its face, threatening to destroy it completely. But Marianne had heard it scream, and she had answered. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning, Marianne stood in the same spot where she'd first seen Blackwood Manor, now transformed beyond recognition. The property had become one of Connecticut's most visited historic sites, welcoming over 50,000 visitors annually. School groups came weekly to learn about the Underground Railroad. Scholars from around the world used the research library, and the community center hosted everything from town meetings to wedding receptions. But the most meaningful transformation was the one nobody saw in the statistics. Sophie, now 12, had become the Manor's youngest volunteer docent, leading tours with the kind of passion that made grown adults cry when she explained how her mother had bought a dying building for $1 and found purpose hidden in its walls. She'd written a book report on Thomas Blackwood that won a statewide history competition. She talked about becoming a historian or preservationist, about spending her life saving buildings that deserved saving. "Mama," Sophie's voice called from a porch. "They're here." Marianne turned to see a familiar battered Toyota pull up the driveway, now paved and lined with historically appropriate plantings. A woman emerged, maybe 35, with 2 children clinging to her hands. She looked exhausted, desperate, and painfully hopeful. Dorothy Fletcher had called 2 days earlier. "There's a woman at the church. Single mother, just lost her apartment, living in her car with her kids. She saw the documentary about Blackwood Manor. She's asking if the sanctuary still exists." Marianne had thought about that word, sanctuary, and everything it meant. The restored manor was a museum now, not a shelter. But Thomas Blackwood's vision had been about more than just buildings. It had been about helping people when they needed help most. She made some calls, used her connections built over 5 years of community work. And now, as the woman approached with tears already streaming down her face, Marianne extended her hand. "I'm Marianne. Welcome to Blackwood Manor. I'm Sarah. I'm so sorry to bother you. I didn't know where else to go. You're not bothering me. You're exactly who's supposed to be here." Marianne smiled at the children, a boy about 8, a girl maybe 5. "Are you hungry? We always have food in the community center kitchen." While Sarah's children ate sandwiches that volunteers had prepared, Marianne explained what she'd arranged. A family in town had offered temporary housing, 3 months rent-free in a small cottage, while Sarah got on her feet. Father Miguel had connections to job placement services. The community center offered free childcare during job interviews. It wasn't gold hidden in walls, but it was sanctuary of a different kind. Why? Sarah's question was the same one Marianne had asked 5 years ago. Why would strangers help me? Because someone helped me when I had nowhere to go. And before that, Thomas Blackwood helped people for 20 years when they had nowhere to go. That's what this place is for. Not just remembering history, continuing it. Sarah broke down completely, the kind of crying that comes from months of held-together desperation finally releasing. Sophie, without being asked, took the 2 children to see the dollhouse, giving their mother space to feel what she needed to feel. Later, after Sarah and her children had been settled with Dorothy, who would drive them to their temporary housing, Marianne walked through the museum alone. It was closed for the day, quiet except for the October wind moving through trees that had witnessed 177 years of history. She stopped in the Hidden Room exhibit, looking at Thomas Blackwood's journal behind its protective glass. A new display had been added, Marianne's own journal, documenting the restoration. Visitors often spent long minutes reading both, connecting past and present. Harold found her there. He was 73 now, still working on preservation projects, still the first person Marianne called when she had questions. Another family helped, he observed, the 14th since we opened. Turns out there's always someone who needs sanctuary. Thomas Blackwood knew that. That's why he built what he built. Harold smiled. You know what the real treasure was, don't you? Not the gold coins. Tell me. It was the possibility. The proof that one person's courage can echo through centuries. That buildings can be more than just wood and stone. They can be promises kept across time. He gestured at the house around them. This place was dying. You saved it. And in saving it, you saved yourself. And now you're saving others. That's the treasure. That's the legacy. Marianne thought about the eviction notice that had started everything. The desperate midnight search. The insane decision to buy an ivy-covered disaster for $1. The moment of opening that wall and finding Thomas Blackwood's final gift. She thought about Sophie, thriving in ways that would have been impossible in that studio apartment. About the community that had rallied around a stranger's desperate dream. About the 50,000 people who had walked through these doors and learned that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing what was right anyway. I need to tell you something, Marianne said suddenly. The endowment is large enough now that we could hire a professional director. Someone with credentials, experience, all the things I don't have. But I keep thinking about Thomas Blackwood's covenant, that this place should be owned by someone immodest, means who needs sanctuary. If I step down, that changes. So don't step down. You're the sanctuary now. You and Sophie. This place doesn't need a professional director. It needs exactly what it has, someone who understands what it means to be desperate, to be saved, to be given a second chance. Through the window, Marianne could see Sophie showing Sarah's children the garden, pointing out the stone marker that read sanctuary offered here. The little girl was laughing, spinning in circles, free for a moment from whatever had been weighing her down. Thomas Blackwood left his gold for whoever would continue the work, Marianne said quietly. I found it. I used it. And now the work continues without gold, just with people caring about other people. That's all it ever needed to be. As evening settled over Blackwood Manor, Marianne locked the museum doors and climbed the stairs to her third-floor sanctuary. Sophie was already there, homework spread across the dining table, completely a home in a space that had once seemed impossible. Mama, I was thinking, when I grow up and have kids, they'll live here too, right? And they'll help people like we do. If that's what you want, baby. This house will be here. The sanctuary will be here, waiting for whoever needs it. Sophie smiled and returned to her homework. Marianne stood at the window, looking out at the property that had saved them, that they had saved in return. The ivy was gone. The face and the vines no longer screamed. And Blackwood Manor stood as it had for 177 years. A promise kept, a sanctuary maintained, a legacy that would never die as long as people remembered what it meant to help strangers who had nowhere else to go. Continue the work. She would. Forever.